Hello, boxings. I teach us things. Behold, I was just watching a video with the beginning of the video with Mike Tyson in the game, um, a rapper, a famous rapper, and they were speaking about crazy. I'm Anthony Wall. I invented the ancient gaming system, and it deciphers, for example, English. English. Every word, every letter spells out a word, and every word spells out a sentence. And the word crazy spells, I'm not crazy. I used anger to force people because I caught them doing bad things leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since. And no, people say, "Oh, people they don't say anything. They're not honest about what they say." And Mike Tyson said that people say that silence can't be misquoted. Silence is misquoted every day. Before the World Trade Center attack and after, because also U/S of it, they put fake ties, fake natures of ties to meet collusion/S at Central Connecticut State University and add conjunctions to it and the differences of the guilt roles with that way manifest as hyper evidential. You got people are all natures of investigators, all ages of them. Originally and still, you guys have roles self-valued. It's recorded. Listen now, A through Z. You guys have roles self-valued with your teachers having replaced, and their teachers of them having replaced what's known, what declassified, what James Madison had declassified for his communications. They did not have free speech even once he was a founder. I mean, even once he was a president/chief also. The only reason anyone who's not Native American earned the title for that, Native Americans, there are proofs that they were a part of that group behind James Madison to have had the might to be able to counter extort at key locations inside of more than 13 colonies, entrenched with everyone against each other, forced. Even slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies, roles entrenched. What kind of unity can be made through that? What kind of nature of independence? What kind of achievements? It was so sickly against every human difference. Women, in other words, kids, elderly, any difference, any positive difference too, peace. Nature itself would have shown us to discern the difference between criminal insidiousness natures of peace and hyper peace. Therefore, nature shows us to discern a nature of the peace distinct. Nature shows us that we are distinct from the other species bodies. A whole bunch of individual species bodies, each one of them made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies, just like our own, so we can discern what is generating this. An individual identity of value/value progression that is none of these things, while all of them at the same time, the way no other identity of volume could be. All see, discern. So Bach sings, but makes us shush to hear. And this is also more probable and practical than that which has been claimed legitimate theory, like the theory of relativity. We have black pupils, whites of eyes, distinctly from the other species bodies that also have eyes, non-distinctly too, and simultaneously, but also per that which is not, that is that distinct identity of simultaneous nature. So I refer to it as the hyper simultaneous nature. And they can and do misquote. They just fake transcripts on campuses filmed 24/7. And they make non-verbal confirmations by people who never had conversations, but they need to do and say whatever No, when they're not going to even have talk, they don't even know people, so they can get away with that, or try to make it look like if they're coming into a contact. There's an identity theft, fraud, slanders, collusion. People want to go into instances, oh, someone lied at a thing like that. They can't go into that. At corners of buildings, they're putting fake ties and fake natures of ties between kids. I recorded them. How? I remember we hear about, oh, there was child abusers of kids and they were forced, and we're like, how could that in our minds? There are mixed natures of organized crimes, including and especially regarding with psychiatry and their roles inter intelligence agencies, not just with the FBI, but FBI with wire crime acts and methods, self-valued from the standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act through the other identities of the law, speaking as a certain type of victim slash hyper victim, victim predator slash hyper predator, shown precedents and statutes, how to deal with it, and instances and names and things, leaving out how they have roles of predicate acts for facts, methods, self-value, criminally foreign influence, fact, shooting nature, quality, aspects in nature, which is the value of what we could discern where and how you guys have self-valued roles, replacing what James Madison's plan was about, that which caused the Declaration of Independence. All other truths were and are being used for lies, and to put around lies, to screen them, to force equality of fact, human nature. Not just as criminal insidiousness, not just criminally foreign influence, not just slash hyper criminally foreign influence, too. Note how slavery was entrenched even northern colonies and southern colonies, northern states and southern states. Our founders declassified why and how by a hyper foreign breaching method. And so they're using the truth for the lie. Like, for example, the American Revolution was against England. That did not address how the North and the South had roles with slavery, how they were the possessions of other countries, international companies, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists. Everyone was roles with that, or sensing anyone not, including if it was a majority of people, including if it was everyone, and that was is adapted to. And then when they adapt to that, everyone just keep more perfectly. While they're coming out of what everyone wants to come out, we know to an extent. When I say it, you know what I'm speaking about, like the whole ocean being polluted. Everyone wants to come out of that. All exceptions in exception nature. Oh, but I have to make them. They come with demonstrations slash S of the same. And it's increasingly also about simultaneously slash hyper simultaneously. Whenever we use a system other than the one generating all group differences, it demonstrates to humanity. And it demonstrates with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures as a special difference being forced away from here, where its identity is everywhere. Its identity relationship to itself that won't change further positive onto. We could ignore its system and be a negative identity relationship to itself and have self-valued roles with it. That's all that I remember. That's all that was permitted. That's all that was allowed since before America's founders were born and through our founding. Since before religious messengers were born and through the writing of their books. Already the campuses and the exceptions were criminally foreign influence slash hyper criminally foreign influence. Nature itself shows us it is most probable and is more probable and is most practical and more practical rather to theorize, let alone to convict, that a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, people from other countries knew they were going to get in trouble for something. And they figured out that the only way they could get out of it is by doing bad things and then forcing people to react to that as factory nature, wrongly. And then that would force, and they would enable it to be the people that would counter that rightly, to counter it rightly. And then everyone's defending themselves rightly but wrongly, exactly the way the breaching method wants and needs. And so, even in other words, at the same time, too, the breaching method knew that literally it could get the people that could only operate the phenomenon of names A through Z of countries. It could get the locations, areas, and states, every single place the human species body has a body, including outer space, which we should come back from, and address properly the needs for space, like with logistics and all that. You guys are out of your minds. Speaking about such serious things, pretend you guys have serious. Meanwhile, we have suburbs from America to Russia to Ukraine that were designed for a torture, extortion, factory nature, slavery method, while being a theater, while having nature demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, while having the only means to counter that is if the self-value rolls, with the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures more and more to self-value collusion /S with the hyperforeign reaching method, which can only be discerned through shared collusion /S that every single person has. And with all exceptions, for example, showing that people or the people are sensing, even if it's a majority of people, even if it's a united country and that's adapted to, and any grouping of countries to counter all the things that it causes and keeps, all those things, it made all kinds of identities of jobs, titles, identities reliant, showing that to pretend to get away their not logic, nature of logic, they need to keep those things blamed on other things, others ourselves. Invaluable ways of different people doing it the same way, basically, distinctly, and wanting to debate that. In other words, like replacing what our founders had to classify. Our founders did not have free speech, and every single person, for a bunch of reasons, had to pretend they had free speech to an extent. /S, or they would be sentenced right through their own too. No one even would be able to kind of. That's what people are trying to say. Like, different areas, just all non-distinctly, but distinctly every single location, because every location, every ground difference. The breaching method designed for torture, extortion, and slavery, northern colonies and southern colonies. The suburbs, the houses, and the basic design and denatured identity, the ground's identity relationship to itself, while being a landscape theater, while being silent, while the cities unfolded the way they did, and they're suburban /urban. They chopped the buildings down, they changed the nature, then they changed like the big mansions they had. Now they're 2-3 family houses. In other words, and they put the things underground. They pack in more people stacking, and everyone reliant upon food from other locations. This is a breaching method that was not just against Native Americans before our America's founders were even born, having been sustained, and the colonists. It has against those countries too. It was since before modern religious messengers were born. Already the campus Marcia system of the ancient republic for which we stand. Since semi-ancient times, it has stood abridged. And so the means and its needs for pantheism too, for a science, the science of that identity of discernment. I mean, the science by our means through that identity of discernment, that identity we could discern generating all things distinctly from them, but while as them, the same way it is of us. Our complete identities, individually grouped in together, they have a semi-nature relationship to itself. Just like the parts of us, a cell body, cell nucleus, and cell wall /S, and with the identity coming through, appreciating gases in their elements, in their mixture, and water in their mixture, and its elements, to show us not just our own identity of value progression, but how it is its own. And we are using its system in relativity /hyperrelativity to positive and negative in its identity. Identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. Values slash values have relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. But where evolution's fruits and gifts and means from nowhere come. This is the science of pantheism and the Campus Martius of the republic for which we stand. That the ancients appreciated how it is functional, being hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from how it is invisible but still discernible, as names for God are. If it's a name, we're speaking about the invisible but still discernible, as the parts of speech are about the invisible but still discernible of English grammar and of other languages. But they come also with discernment needs to discern that a distinct identity of hyper invisible but still discernible. That same one that is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature, where we are distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous with other species bodies. In other words, we're per that which is also further hyper simultaneous, generating everything this way. That's how we are shown it. And in other words, we have been systems abridged. We are supposed to get the Constitution unabridged. The nature debate contains their styles, natures of logic, preventing anyone from telling how originally and still, how all ages and natures of investigations, investigators, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, they never stopped having collusion slash, and with the difference of guilt, and all the news, locations, communications, an array, self-valuing the same sequence shifts, further locked into it since founding, all sides of criminal and of civil cases, the interbranch names, the conjunctions to them, their sources, the lawyers on both sides of the case, same thing. The news, same thing. The difference of guilt of the intelligence at the news networks or next to them, or are their campuses, or where they go, the conjunctions to them, their family members. At the same time, they are kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts with bodies that aren't even in the cave, including ones next to body dumping spots, next to campuses when and how they're involved with ongoing organized crimes and organized crime methods. And in other words, you guys have self-eyed roles so many ways because how you had our founders' communications in place. You have to think about how sick those laws were against every individual person in difference. And pay attention to why, because it knew that way, everyone, when we would come out with what we all want to come out of this trap slash S per a method slash S, like we don't want the whole sea polluted. We don't want to charge ourselves and to have things so expensive on ourselves when we don't need that. And when defenses of the syntax and the syntax nature of that can't defend themselves and afford to be, let alone to protract, short words right in with anybody, let alone for them to protract with convictions proper by the Constitution. In other words, not sanity spoke for any location, let alone the cities. In other words, then they trick her and persuade us to call it a food desert. I don't know who made that up. They don't even realize themselves. In other words, I don't know who made it up. But I mean, there are people that do. I'm not saying the person made a food desert. It's supposed to, it's a rat trap. And it wants the people that are involved with it to be called rats, and then it makes the people look like they're guilty because they're being framed. You guys can't discern that we came through campuses. They're putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to us. You can't discern they're replacing time and needs to speak about principles properly. They're making it about sexual things and counters to it as collusions, including with all kinds of drugs and medicines, crimes, and relative delusions with the experts on reason at triages and with the databases with psychiatry. They're criminally point influence, tactically delusions raw. You have black people's whites of eyes to discern this. This is inseparable from any proper fact-achieving nature about what that breaching method had entrenched, replacing what nature communicates when nature's not criminal insidiousness with black people's whites of eyes. In other words, only criminal insidious natures of communications for nature with our black people's whites of our lives are allowed to be heard. This breaching method shows them that the identities of the law they need to pretend other. And then they show the names of the industries they have to pretend other. Like with the theater industries, criminal insidiousness natures of as theater, criminal insidiousness, criminally foreign influence / hypercriminally foreign influence. I'm not even a lawyer. There are also recorded collusions used remotely since founding, same way. Many pray, vaccines. So Connecticut news networks and their sources and interbranch with a whole bunch of different countries leading up to the war and through wars, they have collusion /S. In many ways, I tell best vaccines. This breaching method that shows them that they were supposed to keep, individuals with the right to the religious right, including to say that those people are nuts. In other words, and even if sarcastically, or in other words, there are roles since we are kids. You pay attention to what's actually recorded. There are all kinds of criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw fact, human nature, quality aspects of nature. And when we really pay attention to why and how that's there, but you have to look at how they're replacing what James Madison communicated about the human fact, human nature breaching method that was entrenched, and then observe how his words and other people's words were used, pretending they don't interpret it, pretending they don't realize, and really not realizing that they declassified there was a breaching method. No one's words were free. We're secure enough to have a quality of fact treatment with speech actual that can defend that. And that could be that enough to defend ourselves and overcome the breaching method with criminal insidious natures and roles with everyone's syntax at all locations. That are only remembered at all locations /S. Every single place the human species body has a body standing. So box sings but makes us shush to hear. That's why in boxing gyms you'll hear the shush sound. This is not a joke. In other words, through the sciences share an identity. Boxing, martial arts, and wrestling are about fighting by the rules. But the rules have been abridged since them ancient times. So everyone missed how this is about how to cause evolution's fruits, gifts, and means out of nowhere. But also to check to make sure we're not just causing criminal insidious natures of positives. Means to cause positives out of negatives, like criminal insidiousness natures of peace, inherent active to and progressive to, the syntax and the syntax nature of people with the versions of positive and negative, and of names, treatments, pretended legitimate by the only voices you are allowed to hear, and or that voice is adapted to. I want to connect it to the common sense because with the American history with the pamphleteers, but that's what Charlie Kirk was trying to that's what common sense. But see, when they attack each person's difference, in other words, and they're countering each other, like this breaching method has the people countering with sexual things with the campuses and the kids and their narratives and natures behind it. The counters to it are collusion /S with differences, cover-ups too, pretending other, as the breaching method showed them how to speak to the law. And then how to get away with it by keeping everyone else pretending it like people are, in other words, they're jumping into our conversations dishonestly. They're planting evidences even on Facebook. They have World Trade Center attack, collusion, self-valued, recorded, Facebook itself. And then with upskirt pictures on Twitter Then they sold it to X. These are not legitimate identities of law. Just because they're making more jobs. Oh, this guy works with the police for the internet. Oh, but he's a CIA. Yeah, your minds. You got James Madison's communications replaced black people. They had even George Washington had to be counter extorted demonstrably. You guys are going to speak. You guys can't even communicate for James Madison properly. You're going to try to go into the Monroe Doctrine. You guys are out of your minds. Even George Washington. You guys need to be healed. Please follow mandated law because I can't just call I tried to communicate with Saudi Arabia. I can't get them and the Wethersfield police collusions with the Saudi attackers and reported Saudi attackers, but attack. I'm just going to call them the attackers because there are a whole bunch of countries involved, like with these people named Scalora. People from other areas involved on my street with the name Scalora, with a whole bunch of courts and their family members. And Wethersfield police and other police forms involved with identity theft, fraud, I never saw on my street in my life. People named Scalora. They're also involved with organized crimes at my campuses from other campuses, with the people that were putting fake things, with the Wethersfield police chiefs retired. In the same house /S, further involved with the Phil Colo and the Bob Chase at Whiting Forensics with a bunch of people, with all kinds of natures of organized crimes. And more child abusers, leaders of kids, years apart, first forest. And they had roles with that. And more yet and then. And the same ones had roles with the elderly homes and the untimely deaths and uses of confession /S manifest. At best, vaccines. Central Connecticut State University has collusion /S also with the founding of this industry of marijuana in Connecticut. And like with former director, the former standing chairperson on the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, Robert Luskin, and his co-defendants, their family members, a bunch of people with the family members and intimate ties of Hartford courts and New Britain Superior Court were collusions with leaders of the kids and their kids, intercities through time, with people involved with predicate acts on all sides of my house, with the intelligence community at Central Connecticut State University in Britain, and my house is in Wethersfield. They try to make other exceptions where they knew they were going to have to hide how they use fake exceptions. These are people that switch names into branch, where how one of the things that they are manifest as is roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders method /S, and motivation screening, because the breaching methods involved with your motivations, why and how. You guys have other things, others are self-forced, blamed, and self-eyed roles, and or sensing for anyone not, with the breaching method. In other words, replacing what our founders communicated about. What our answer should be for things about like slavery, what that was about, what witch trials are about, what the founding locations were about. They're about James Madison's plan. Don't forget it. He had to counter extort everyone because no one was safe if they tried to have a quality of fact treatment nature. That was not collusion against themselves to an extent and everyone else. That was measured and maintained by not just by internationally monitored conversations with the different countries, all sickly distinctly with slavery even, and with Native American difference. Because that's important because nature is hyper native, and it shows us. In other words, we're supposed to get the Constitution unabridged. President /chief are not supposed to be compatible unless we are correlating by the species body of individual body system way. Humanity pray. Vaccines. We must be a hyper tribe. But as the species body together. In other words, not so stupid. No, in other words, theme. Not some stupid native theme. Something that really with syntax appreciates properly how there is a tactically denatured ground below the feet of all Americans and Native Americans, especially, many ways. it starts coming different when everyone starts defending their difference as collusions, exactly what the breaching method wants and needs. Make it even, in other words, because if everyone debated honestly, it would have surfaced how Native Americans are a part of that plural grouping that backed James Madison and his plan and enabled them to be a temporary extortion. And then the laws were so crazy against everyone and they were unfair against everyone, they had no plan but to defend themselves by valuing the only unity that there could be. And the breaching method already had it, so no one could make a unity possible. Even the Native Americans had to fight with Native Americans. They tactically denatured everything. It's not just that we have to go through abridged systems. It's a whole bunch of sick things at once to hide what is non-distinctly there. Through ourselves, though. Forgiveness is not so we can look away from guilt. It's so we don't get it wrong exactly the way it needs, leaving itself out. And to discern itself. It's right where everyone's guilty at the same time. Replacing what our founders, for example, communicated by black people's rights of eyes. Just with this alone, it's so easy since we are kids. You don't even have to know the phrase, criminally foreign influenced. But we're going to learn it. I'm not even a lawyer. We're going to learn them too. Whoa. Boxing. Teach us things.